This third part of nature of federal system. This is about the Constitution of India. By empowering the union government to issue directions upon the state governments to ensure due compliance with the legislative and administrative actions of the union, Article 256 to 257, and to supersede a state government which refuses to comply with such direction, Article 365. By empowering the president to withdraw to union the executive and legislative powers of the state under the Constitution if he is at any time satisfied that the administration of the state cannot be carried on in the normal manner in accordance with the provision of Constitution. Owing to political or other reasons, Article 356, from the federal standpoint, this seems to be anomalous in as much as the constitution makers did not consider it necessary to provide for any remedy whatever for the similar breakdown of the constitutional machinery at the center. Hence, the moniker is justified in observing the constitution itself has created a kind of paramountcy for the center by providing for the suspension of state governments and the imposition of president's rule under certain conditions such as the breakdown of the administration. Secondly, the power to suspend the constitutional machinery may be exercised by the president, not only on the report of the governor of the state concerned, but also so motu, whenever he is satisfied that the situation calling for the exercise of this power has arisen. It is thus a coercive power available to the union against the units of the federation. But though the above scheme seeks to avoid the demerits of the federal system, there is perhaps such an emphasis on the strength of the union government as affects the federal principle as it is commonly understood. Thus, a foreign critic, Professor Weir, was led to observe that Indian constitution provides a system of government which is quasi-federal, a unitary state with subsidiary federal features rather than a federal state with subsidiary unitary features. In his later work in Modern Constitution, he puts it generically thus: in the class of quasi-federal constitution, it is probably proper to include the Indian Constitution of 1950. Professor Alexandrovich has taken great pains to combat the view that the Indian Federation is quasi-federation. He seems to agree with this author when he says that India is a case sui generis. This is in accord with the author's observation that the Constitution of India is neither purely federal nor purely unitary, but is a combination of both. It is union or composite state of a novel type. It enshrines the principle that in spite of federalism, the national interest ought to be paramount. In fact, anybody who impartially studies the Indian Constitution from close quarters and acknowledges that political science today admits of different variations of the federal system cannot but observe that the Indian system is extremely federal, as that it is a federation with a strong centralizing tendency. Strictly speaking, any deviation from American model of pure federation would make a system quasi-federal, and if so, the Canadian system too can hardly escape being branded as quasi-federal. The difference between the Canadian and the Indian system lies in the degree and extent of unitary emphasis. The real test of the federal character of a political structure is, as Professor Weir has himself observed, that however in what appears on paper only, it remains to be seen whether in actual practice the features entrench and or strengthen themselves as they have in Canada, or whether the strong trend towards centralization, which is the feature of most Western governments in the world, is crisis, will compel these federal aspects of the Constitution to wither away. A survey of the actual working of our Constitution for the last 50 years would hardly justify the conclusion that even though the unitary bonds have in some respects been further tightened, the federal features have altogether withered away. In some scholars in India have urged that the unitary bias of our Constitution has been accentuated in its actual working by two factors, so much so that very little is left of federalism. These two factors are the overwhelming financial power of the Union and the utter dependence of the states upon Union grants for discharging their functions. The comprehensive sweep of the Union Planning Commission set up under the concurrent power over planning. The criticism may be justified in points of degree but not in principle for two reasons. Both these controls are aimed at securing a uniform development of the country as a whole. It is true that the bigger states are not allowed to appropriate all their resources, and the system of assignment and distribution of tax resources by Union, Article 269, 270, 272. means the dependence of the states upon the Union to a large extent, but left alone the stronger and bigger states might have left the smaller ones lagging behind to the detriment of our national strength. Even in the country like United States, such factors have in practice strengthened the national government to a degree which could not have been dreamed of by the fathers of the Constitution. Curiously enough, the same complaint as in India has been raised in the United States. Thus, of the centralizing power of federal grants, an American writer has observed, here is an attack on federalism so subtle that it is scarcely realized. Control of economic life and of these social services, which unemployment, old age, maternity and child welfare were the two major functions of a state and the local government. The first has largely passed into national hands, the second seems to be passing. If these both go, what we shall have left of the state autonomy will be a hollow shell, a symbol. In fact, the traditional theory of mutual independence of the two governments, federal and states, has given way to cooperative federalism in most of the federal countries today. An American scholar explains the concept of cooperative federalism in these words: the practice of administrative cooperation between general and regional governments, the partial dependence of the regional governments upon payments from the general governments, and the fact that the general government, by the use of conditional grants, frequently promote developments in matters which are constitutionally assigned to the regions. Hence, the system of federal cooperation existing under the Indian Constitution through allocation by the Union of the taxes collected or direct grants or allocation of plan funds do not necessarily militate against the concept of federalism, and that is why the Granville-Austin prefers to call Indian federalism a cooperative federalism which produces a strong central government, yet it does not necessarily result in weak provincial government that are largely administrative agencies for central policies. In fact, the federal system in the Indian Constitution is a compromise between two apparently conflicting considerations. There is a normal division of powers under which the state enjoy autonomy within their own spheres with the power to raise revenue renew the need of the national integrity and the strong union government, which the senior section of the people still consider necessary after 50 years of working of the Constitution. This is all about today's part of nature of the federal system about Indian Constitution. Thanks, regards.